She walked into the forest to escape the pain. And found something that would change her life forever. At one of the darkest moments in her life, Clara made a decision to leave everything behind and isolate herself from the world. What started as a quiet walk alone turned into a journey of connection, courage. And a miracle. When she came across a dying bear, Clara had to make an impossible choice, and what she did will move you from start to finish. Get ready for one of the most touching stories you'll ever hear. Every minute uncovers a new layer of humanity, nature, and redemption. If you love stories that truly touch the soul, go ahead and give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell, because you won't want to miss this emotional journey. The forest was completely silent, like the whole world had paused to hold its breath. Clara walked slowly, her footsteps light on the damp carpet of fallen leaves. Her eyes were downcast, lost, just like her heart. It was the third day of her lonely hike. She wasn't looking for anything except silence, and maybe, though she wouldn't admit it, a sign that life could still surprise her. The sky, once blue, was now turning into a heavy gray. A cold breeze drifted between the tall trees. The air felt like something was about to change. She stopped. A strange sound broke the stillness, faint, almost too soft to notice. A cry, hoarse, long, full of pain. What was that? She whispered to herself, slowly turning, her eyes trying to cut through the dense forest. The sound came again, a low moan coming from farther ahead, beyond the trail where nothing remained but thick brush. Clara hesitated, and nothing remained but thick brush. Clara hesitated. Say, spurless, to saint, almost too soft to notice. The call, throw, mows. Her instincts told her to keep walking, to ignore it. But there was something in that sound that stirred something deeply human and deeply vulnerable inside her. That doesn't sound like a normal animal. Double quotes, she said softly, trying to mask the shiver running down her spine. She followed the sound. Step by step, the moan grew clearer, more real. The trees closed in around her, like nature itself was guarding a secret. The path disappeared, but Clara didn't care anymore. It felt like something was calling her, like someone or something was waiting for her. And then she saw it. Through fallen trees and snapped branches, a massive shape covered in thick, dark fur. The body lay, still, slumped to one side. A bear. She stepped back instinctively, her heart pounding, her hands damp with sweat. But the bear didn't move, only that soft, low moaning sound. It was coming from him, wanted. Only sound, the real fallen trev, nesses, massive safe, slumped to one side, was over. The smell of blood hung in the air. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. What happened to you? She stood there, frozen, staring at the animal, and for a moment she felt like he was staring back, not with anger, but with deep exhaustion, like he wasn't asking for help, just to be seen, just to not be alone. The forest went quiet again, but now the silence felt heavier. What heavier? The silence felt heavier. What else? When staring just to there, Frodo's staring at the animal with anger but with deep exhaustion, like he wasn't asking for help out of the for it. This. Clara didn't know it yet, but this moment would mark the beginning of something that would change her life forever. Clara was breathing hard. It wasn't from the hike or the cold that was now starting to seep into her bones. It was what she saw in front of her. That bear, a creature that, under any other circumstances, would inspire fear, was lying motionless between the roots of an old tree, like a living statue carved out of pain. She stepped closer slowly, each movement careful, as if walking on sacred ground. The bear's eyes were half open, glassy, and its massive chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Its fur, thick and once majestic, was matted with mud, leaves, and dried blood, but what made Clara choke on her breath was what she saw on its front paw, a cruel, primitive, steel trap sunk deep into the animal's flesh. The jaws of the trap were still clenched, iron teeth buried down to the bone. Blood trickled out in dark streams, mixing with the dirt, nearly black in color. That bear had been there for days, fighting, slowly dying. A wave of nausea and helplessness surged through Clara. Then came the anger. Who would leave a trap like this out here? Who could be so heartless to do this to such a magnificent creature? But the fury quickly gave way to fear. This was still a wild predator, wounded or not. One wrong move and it could all be over in seconds. She took a step back, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do. Then the bear looked at her. It was brief, just a glance, but that look, it was everything. There was no rage in it, no threat, only pain, ancient, quiet, resigned, pain. And in that instant, Clara felt something she hadn't expected, a reflection. That look mirrored what she carried inside. Look mirrored what she carried inside. Because she was hurt too. Because she had also stopped fighting. Because coming into this forest hadn't really been about finding life, but about escaping the feeling of living. "I can't leave you like this," she whispered, the words slipping out on their own. She knelt down instinctively as if her presence alone could soothe the beast. The bear didn't move. Its breath remained faint, and its eyes slowly started to close. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. He was dying. And there, among twisted roots, blood, and the oppressive silence of the woods, she realized she had a choice. The forest was vast. She could turn around and walk away. No one would ever know. No one would blame her. It was just another wounded animal in a fight that wasn't hers. But there was something in that pain she couldn't ignore. Maybe because in that moment, saving the bear might be the only thing that could save her. Till she didn't know how. Not yet. But deep down, something inside her had already made the decision. She was staying. Time felt like it had stopped. Clara remained kneeling just a few feet from the bear, her knees buried in the cold mud, trembling hands resting on her thighs. The scent of wet earth, mixed with blood, sweat, and forest moss, was strong enough to make her nauseous, but she couldn't move. She couldn't look away. She couldn't look away. She couldn't look away. It had stopped. Clara remained kneeling just a few feet from the bear, her numbling hands resting on her thighs. The scent of wet earth, mixed with blood, swash moss, was strong luff. That massive, silent creature held her in place. Like something invisible had anchored her to that moment. Rain began to fall softly, whispering through the leaves. Tiny droplets ran down Clara's face, blending with the tears. She didn't even realize she was crying. Every second passed slowly, as if the forest itself was waiting for her decision. She knew the risks. Logically, she understood how insane this was. Approaching a wild animal, even one that was wounded, could end in tragedy. Especially a bear that size. Her grandfather, who had taught her to love nature since she was a little girl, used to say, "The forest is beautiful, but it's not kind." And every wild animal, no matter how calm it seems, carries the instinct to survive. But something felt different. This time the look she had seen in the bear's eyes wasn't wild. It was surrender. As if he had lost every battle he could fight. As if he didn't have the strength left to resist. Clara slowly sat back on her heels, brought her hands to her face, and took a deep breath. Images of her father in the hospital flashed in her mind. Words never spoken. Messages left unanswered. It all came rushing back like a storm. She had run from that pain. She'd hidden in the forest to silence her grief, to drown the guilt, to find a peace that never came. But now life was holding up a cruel mirror, and the reflection was a bleeding giant, on the verge of giving up, just like her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, almost to herself. I don't even know how to save myself." Her eyes turned again to the wound. The trap was old, rusted, clearly illegal, left behind by some cowardly hunter. It was grotesque, a symbol of senseless cruelty. And she knew, if she didn't do something soon, the bear wouldn't survive the night. She opened her backpack with shaky hands. Inside were just a few items: a blanket, some rope, her old pocket knife, a canteen of warm water, a small first aid kit. More will than resources. None of it felt like enough. No clear plan came to mind. But time didn't care. She felt the sudden urge to get up and walk away, just turn her back and disappear. No one would ever know. Then the bear's eyes opened again, and he looked at her, this time with more clarity, as if asking, "Are you going to leave me?" Clara's heart clenched. This wasn't about logic or safety. It was about humanity. She took a deep breath, one step, then another. And then she knelt beside him close enough to hear his weak but steady breathing. She reached out her hand slowly, speaking in a gentle voice, like calming a frightened child. "I'm here, okay? I'm not gonna hurt you. I just want to try to help." The bear didn't move. He just breathed, as if the simple sound of her voice was enough to give him a little more time. Clara swallowed hard. Doubt still pulsed in her veins. Fear still echoed in her bones. But she knew the next step would be the hardest and the most necessary. The rain was getting heavier. Thick drops fell from the treetops, tracing cold, winding paths down Clara's skin like icy trails. She squinted against the water, took a deep breath, and looked again at the bear. He was still but alive. His chest rose in slow, uneven waves, each breath like a final act of will. Clara knew time was running out. The wound wasn't just bleeding. It was inflamed, swollen, the surrounding tissue dark and pulsing, as if the bear's body were desperately trying to reject the cruel object embedded in it. If she waited any longer, the infection would win. But if she made a mistake, if she caused too much pain and the bear reacted out of instinct, it could be the end. For him, or for her. She carefully opened her pocket knife. The blade caught what little light filtered through the forest canopy. She remembered when her father gave it to her as a child, saying, "A blade is only as good as what you're willing to use it for." She never imagined good would one day look like this. She reached out slowly, as if offering peace. She spoke the whole time in a quiet, steady voice, like she was trying to wrap the bear in a cocoon of calm. "It's okay, I'm here, it's just me, I'm not gonna hurt you." With one knee on the ground and her body leaning in, Clara examined the trap up close. It was old, yes, but still locked tight. The iron teeth were buried deep. But maybe, just maybe, if she could use something thin enough to force the spring mechanism. She grabbed a rope from her backpack, wrapped it around the ends of the trap, creating tension. Then, gripping tightly, she used the tip of the knife as a lever. The metal groaned, a deep, grinding sound. Clara held her breath. Her hands trembled. With the effort, her fingers slipping from the rein, her knees pressed hard into the cold, where ground. Suddenly, a sharp metallic snap. The trap sprang open with a jolt. The bear let out a short roar, more pain than rage. Clara fell backward, heart racing, eyes wide. "It's okay, you're okay," she said quickly, panting, still on the ground. The bear shifted, slightly, but didn't strike, didn't growl, didn't drive her away. The paw was free. Clara crawled back over, grabbed the cloth from her backpack, and without thinking, pressed it to the wound. Blood flowed in a thick stream now, but freed from the trap's pressure, it ran more freely, and somehow that felt like a small victory. She poured warm water from her canteen to clean the area, doing what she could, her eyes fixed on the injury but her mind drifting between fear and flickers of fragile hope. The bear trembled. So did Clara. But in that moment, something silent passed between them. She was helping, and he was letting her. After improvising a bandage with a cloth, strips torn from her shirt, and some gauze from the first aid kit, Clara sat back, exhausted. She no longer felt the cold or the rain, only the strange warmth of a bond that, even without words, had taken root. She leaned her back against the trunk of a tree and whispered, almost like a confession, "I didn't think I could make it either." The bear closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt that maybe, just maybe, she still mattered to someone. Even if that someone had 4 legs, weighed half a ton, and carried scars as deep as hers. The forest had sunk into a deep twilight, painted in shades of gray and shadow. The trees whispered with the wind and the steady drizzle that continued to fall, covering everything in a cold, damp veil. Clara felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders, but there was no time to rest. The bear, her bear now, she thought with strange tenderness, was breathing heavily. Trembling slightly, his eyes closed as if fighting to stay somewhere between sleep and consciousness. She knew he needed shelter, and fast. Digging through memories of childhood camping trips with her father, Clara got to work. She scoured the area for sturdy branches, broad leaves, and anything else that could shield him from the cold and rain. Around his massive body she built a makeshift shelter, a crude tent made of sticks, leaves, and the rain poncho she pulled from her backpack. She covered part of the bear with the blanket she had brought, even though it was far too small. Every move was careful, not out of respect. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. That night, Clara stayed by his side. She lit a small fire at a safe distance, using a lighter and some dry twigs she'd kept wrapped in her pack. She ate a granola bar and shared a piece of stale bread with the bear, who, even weak and worn, licked the food gently from her hand in a slow, painful motion. That moment carved something into her, a bond that didn't need words, promises, or reasons. It was just presence, just one living being taking care of another. As the rain began to ease and the fire's warmth created a fragile cocoon in the middle of the chaos, Clara began to talk. At first, her voice was uncertain, then steadier. Like the darkness and the forest's distant hum were old companions. "I lost my dad 2 months ago," she said, voice catching in her throat. "It was sudden, a stupid accident, senseless. He always told me to respect the wild, you know? To understand that everything has its place. But after he was gone, I stopped understanding anything." She looked at the bear, whose breathing had deepened. His ears twitched gently at the sound of her voice. "I thought coming out here would help me forget, would make the pain smaller. But it came with me, crawled into my backpack. Would Mike crawled into my backpack. As its place. But after understanding anything." She looked at the bear, whose breathing had deepened. His ears twitched gently at the sound of her voice. "But it could make the pain smaller. But it came with me, crawled into my backpack. Slept beside me every night." The fire cracked, almost like it was listening. Clara pulled her knees to her chest and went on. "And then you showed up. Dying, wounded, left here like something forgotten by the world. And I couldn't walk away, because somehow I know what that feels like, to be that alone, to not know why you should keep going." She sat in silence for a long while. Then she began to tell stories about her childhood, by the world, and what a world. I don't know that was like, to be that alone, to not know why you should. Very less way. Parvo. How her father used to mimic animal sounds just to make her laugh. About the first time she saw a bear in an illustrated book when she was 7. About the quiet ache of living in a city where no one really looked each other in the eyes without pretending everything was fine. And the bear listened. Maybe not with ears, but with something deeper. Clara could feel it. She knew he was absorbing her words, or at least the energy behind them. Compassion, hope, the kind of fragile vulnerability that was slowly becoming strength. The night was long. At some point, Clara fell asleep beside the shelter, her feet stretched toward the fire. When she woke, it was still dark, but the sky was beginning to lighten. The bear was breathing easier now. No growls, no moans, just a deep, healing sleep. She smiled small, genuine. She smiled small, genuine. She smiled small, genuine. For the first time in weeks, there was something inside her that wasn't pain. It was care. It was purpose. It was life. The days that followed felt like they existed outside of time. The forest, always alive, had become part of Clara's rhythm. The sound of birds at dawn, the pattering of rain on broad leaves, the subtle creak of branches bending in the wind, all of it felt less hostile now, almost welcoming. As if nature itself, aware of the fragile pact between a woman and a wounded bear, had decided to shelter them for a while. The bear, now silently named Bruno by Clara, began to move more often. At first, just small shifts of his body. Then, painful attempts to lift his head or move the paw that had once been trapped. Every bit of progress was slow but meaningful. Clara celebrated each one quietly, her heart tight, eyes misty, always afraid it was just a fleeting illusion. She cleaned the wound twice a day, boiling water in a small pot she carried in her backpack, using improvised compresses and applying what was left of her first aid ointments. When she realized her supplies were nearly gone, she thought about going back to town for a few hours, but she couldn't leave. The idea of leaving Bruno alone, even for a short time, made her feel physically ill. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, almost primal. On those cold nights, Clara spoke to him like an old friend. She read from her journal, told him about dreams she had buried with her youth, about the constant fear of being irrelevant, invisible. Bruno listened with his whole body. Sometimes, his eyes would open and rest on her, calm, heavy, knowing. Other times, just the rhythm of his breath seemed to say, "I'm here, keep going." One late afternoon, with the sky painted in shades of copper and orange, Bruno tried to stand. Clara, gathering dry leaves to reinforce the shelter, froze when she heard the sound of his heavy body shifting. She rushed to his side. Their eyes met. And then, with heartbreaking effort, he planted his front paws on the ground and slowly lifted his chest, as if the act itself were a defiance of death. "Easy, that's it, boy," Clara whispered, as though her voice could help hold him up. Bruno stayed upright for just a few seconds. He took a deep breath, then collapsed again, quietly without drama, as if simply standing had been enough. Clara knelt beside him, running her dirt-stained fingers gently across his forehead, fingers full of tenderness. "You did it. I saw you. You're still strong." In the days that followed, progress became undeniable. Bruno could now drag himself to a small nearby stream, where he drank cool water and dipped his snout. His paw, still sensitive, could bear some of his weight. His appetite returned. Clara had to build simple traps to catch small rodents, forage for wild berries, and even gave up her last food rations. She never complained. Feeding the bear had become sacred. It was more than survival. It was a vow of hope. One morning, while she prepared an herbal infusion to clean the wound, Clara noticed Bruno watching her closely. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something closer to awareness, as if he knew he was alive because of her. And Clara, seeing him like that, massive, scarred, but standing, breathing, surviving, felt something in her begin to stir again. A part of her that had died with her father was slowly being rebuilt, stitched back together with each act of care, each sleepless night, each small victory shared with her companion of the wild. She wasn't just saving a bear, she was, in some way, saving herself. Time, which once seemed to drag on in endless days, now passed with a quiet urgency. Clara noticed it in how Bruno's body grew stronger with each morning, how his eyes opened with more light and less pain. He now moved with confidence, though still with a limp. Sometimes, he would disappear into the bush for a few minutes, only to return and lie beside the makeshift shelter, like someone visiting a temporary home. She knew what that meant. Bruno was almost ready. You know what that meant? Bruno was almost ready. And deep down, so was Clara. That day's sun rose shyly, filtering through the branches like a whispered goodbye. Clara woke early, even though she didn't want to. The silence around her felt different. Not the usual hush of the forest, but something solemn, like the pause before the final note of a symphony. Bruno wasn't in the shelter. Her heart jumped. She stepped out of the tent, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth. She scanned the woods, calling softly, the way someone calls a loved one. "Bruno? Where did you go?" And then she saw him. Just a few meters away, standing between two tall pines, Bruno stood tall. His injured paw pressed firmly into the ground. His snout pointed toward the horizon. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the forest. At home. Clara stopped. And something inside her, something that had fought against this moment for days, finally let go. She walked to him slowly, sat down on the edge of a rock, arms resting on her knees, and simply watched. For long minutes, neither of them moved. Only the wind, whispering through the trunks, carried the unspoken farewell. "You're really going, huh?" she asked, a sad smile on her lips. "That's okay. That's why I stayed. To see you return." Bruno slowly turned his head. His eyes met hers one last time. There was no growl, no grand gesture, just a look. A deep, silent gaze filled with ancient wisdom. A single tear rolled down Clara's cheek, warm like the final thread of everything she had felt in that place. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "for not giving up, and for reminding me that I can keep going too." Bruno walked, unhurried. Each step was steady, solemn, almost ceremonial. The forest welcomed him back like a lost son. And when he finally disappeared into the thick shadows of the trees, Clara remained there, alone, feeling the emptiness as if a part of her own body had stood up and walked away. But she didn't cry, because now the pain was different. No longer the pain of loss, but the beautiful ache of having loved something that couldn't stay, of having cared for another being, and in the process rediscovered herself. Of having given without expecting anything in return, and still having received the world. She stayed there until the sun reached the tops of the trees, and only then began to pack her things. She didn't need the forest in the same way anymore. She had done what she didn't even know she had come to do. At the bottom of her backpack, she found an old button from her father's coat, one of those little things that, by chance or fate, had survived time. Clara held it between her fingers, thought of Bruno, thought of her father, and smiled. The forest would keep that story, but inside her, what was lived there would never be lost. Clara walked alone down the trail, but the solitude that once felt like a heavy stone now carried a different weight, light, almost comforting. The forest, once a place to hide from the world, had become the place where she rediscovered herself. Each step was both a farewell and a celebration. The trees, the sounds, the scent of wet earth. All of it now felt like part of her skin. She no longer needed to run. When she finally left the forest behind and saw the first road signs of the rural highway, a tightness gripped her chest. For days, her world had been just her, the bear, and the delicate dance between survival and hope. Now, the world returned vast, noisy, indifferent. But Clara was no longer the same woman who had entered that forest. And that alone made everything different. Back in the city, the urban sounds felt almost violent. Cars, rushed voices, lights that were too bright. Clara struggled to adjust to the normal routine. She barely slept those first nights, missing the rustle of leaves, the crackling fire, the slow breath of Bravio at her side. Sometimes she'd wake in a panic, her body expecting the smell of earth, not concrete. But slowly the emptiness gave way to a new drive. She began looking for wildlife rehabilitation centers. Started as a volunteer, cleaning cages, organizing supplies, scrubbing barns, always quietly, humbly. But there was something in her eyes, in her hands, that no one else there had. She knew what it meant to look an animal in the eyes and understand that its pain could also be human. That's how Clara began to share her story. First with a fellow volunteer, then with a group of visiting school children. Soon, she was invited to speak at universities and non-profit events. Her story wasn't just about the bear. It was about loss, resilience, and what it means to hold another life in your hands when your own feels shattered. And people listened. They cried. They saw themselves in her words. In her living room, she kept a small framed photo, taken by one of the center's volunteers, of Clara beside a recovering bear, their eyes locked. It wasn't Bravio, of course. She never saw him again. But it was a living reminder of everything she had learned. That love, even silent, can heal. That pain, when accepted, can become a bridge. And that you don't need to speak the same language to save one another. Years later, on a quiet solo hike through a different trail, Clara heard a sound in the distance, a distinct rustle. She turned instinctively, saw only trees. But for a brief second, she swore she saw a shadow between the trunks, large, strong, with calm eyes, and in that moment, she knew. Bravio was alive, somewhere, and so was she. There was no need for a reunion. What they had lived together was already sealed in the soul. She continued walking with a quiet smile, a secret kind of peace in her chest, knowing something greater had come full circle. Because in the end, Clara hadn't just saved a bear. She has saved herself.